What happens when a powerful politician tries to silence a black congresswoman on live TV, only to realize she'd just handed her the mic? The moment Pam Bondi interrupted Jasmine Crockett, the air in the studio turned electric, not with tension, but with the quiet thrill of someone about to rewrite the rules of the game. The studio lights didn't just shine, they interrogated. Each beam, hot against Jasmine Crockett's skin, felt like a question. Are you ready to be seen for who you really are? The room, though not silent, was thick with unspoken tension. She had been in courtrooms that felt less hostile than this. Polished television set. The faces around her weren't just curious. They were waiting for her to stumble, to confirm every bias they'd brought with them. But Jasmine had grown up in places where silence wasn't safety. It was survival. And survival had taught her to speak. She glanced sideways at Pam Bondi. The woman sat poised like a well-practiced statue of authority, arms crossed in subtle defiance. Her eyes held that calm, weaponized confidence Jasmine had seen 100 times before, usually in prosecutors who mistook power for righteousness. But Jasmine knew how to read beneath the surface. Pam's posture screamed control, but her fingertips twitched when the cameras weren't looking. Jasmine recognized that twitch. It was the body's last attempt to mask doubt. As a production, assistants scrambled across the floor, tripping over cables and whispering apologies. The studio pretended not to notice. Everyone's attention was locked on the conversation that hadn't even started yet. Jasmine sat back in her chair, exhaled slowly, and rolled her shoulders like a boxer just before the bell. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her mother's voice echoed, "Some fights are won without shouting, but you better know when to raise your voice like thunder." The segment topic was crime and justice reform, a subject as loaded as it was predictable. For women like Pam, it was a performance opportunity. Quote a few statistics, talk about accountability, and offer zero solutions. But for Jasmine, this wasn't performance. It was personal. These weren't theoretical talking points. Every story, every law she'd fought against, every name she'd read in a report, those were real people. She didn't need talking points. She was the point. Pam struck first, speaking in a voice honeyed by decades of courtroom decorum and political television. Her words were measured, carefully rehearsed, like a piano piece played not with feeling, but with precision. Jasmine watched the audience, not Pam. She could see their eyes darting, processing, questioning. Some nodded, some crossed their arms, but none had heard her yet. She wasn't going to respond just to speak. She was going to disrupt. This wasn't just a policy debate. This was a stage set for battle. Pam might have brought law degrees and Fox News swagger, but Jasmine brought the fire of every forgotten voice that had once been told to wait their turn. Her turn was now. The moderator turned toward her with the first question. A hush fell. Jasmine inhaled deeply, her hands still, her heart steady. This wasn't about sounding right. It was about being undeniable. Tonight, she thought, someone's narrative is going to crumble, and it won't be mine. Jasmine's voice, when it finally came, didn't rise. It settled. It settled over the room like truth slipping through the cracks of carefully constructed lies. When we talk about justice, she began, her tone composed but unwavering, we have to be willing to look it in the eye, even when it looks back and makes us uncomfortable. There was no dramatics, no rhetorical flourishes, just her voice, firm, factual, and impossible to ignore. She laid out federal data like a surgeon laying tools on a tray. Cash bail statistics, sentencing disparities, cases where minor charges had ballooned into life-destroying outcomes. She wasn't trying to win, she was trying to warn, but warnings aren't welcome in places built for performance. As she spoke, she noticed Pam shifting in her seat, not overtly but enough. The way a chess player realizes the game is not going as planned. Then came the interruption. Pam Bondi leaned in, that condescending smile spreading across her face like frost. "No disrespect, Congresswoman," she said, that familiar preamble. That always precedes a dismissal. "But you're cherry-picking stats." Her hand waved the air between them, like brushing away a fly. The audience reacted before Jasmine did, some startled, some smug, most confused about what would come next. Jasmine paused, not because she was shaken, but because she wanted the silence. Let it hang. Let it expose the condescension in Bondi's tone, the fragility behind her performance. Then she turned, slowly, as if studying an exhibit at a museum, one that was missing the historical context. "Respectfully," she said, "what I cited wasn't cherry-picked. It was the Department of Justice's own report. If facts make us uncomfortable, that's not the data's fault." Pam blinked. The audience didn't clap. This wasn't a movie, but the air shifted. Jasmine kept going. "You speak about responsibility. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about prosecutors who withhold evidence, about judges who give different sentences for the same crime, based not on the crime, but the skin tone of the accused." Pam's fingers clenched slightly around her pen. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jasmine had taken control, not by yelling, but by refusing to be reduced. The moderator moved in, sensing danger in the air, but Jasmine wasn't finished. "We can't reform what we refuse to admit is broken," she said, "and pretending these truths are cherry-picked only delays justice for people who can't afford to wait." The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was earned. Jasmine had turned the moment on its head. Bondi had interrupted to diminish her. But instead, she'd handed her the floor, and Jasmine turned it into a podium. This wasn't the knockout yet, but the balance of power had shifted. Pam Bondi had rehearsed for this night. Her team had prepped her with flashcards, stats, even counter-arguments tailored to Jasmine's likely talking points. But nothing, none of it, had prepared her for the name that came next. "Do you remember Alonzo Brewer?" Jasmine asked, her voice still calm, still steady. The question was so sudden, so specific, it sliced through the panel's artificial rhythm like a blade through silk. Pam's expression faltered. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then fear. "Alonzo Brewer," Jasmine repeated. "He spent 12 months in pretrial detention. Over a charge so minor it didn't even make the news. But your office ignored every motion to expedite. And his sister? She called your team. Twice." The silence that followed was brutal. Not the awkward kind that fills space during a live taping, but the heavy kind, the kind that feels like grief, the kind that belongs at funerals, not on television. Pam's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time in her career, her instinct to respond failed her. She didn't have a soundbite for this. There was no safe line to retreat to. The name had knocked her off script, off guard, off balance. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't press. She simply waited for the weight of Alonzo's story to land where it needed to. Jasmine turned to the audience now, not the cameras. "There are families watching this right now who know what I'm talking about. They've lived it, they've buried it, and they're still waiting for someone to say it out loud." Her eyes scanned the room, locking with viewers who'd come for politics, but stayed for the truth. "This isn't about attacking you, Ms. Bondi. This is about accountability, real accountability, the kind that doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling." Pam looked away. For a flash of a second, she seemed small, not in stature, but in presence. The room that once bent to her voice now felt like it belonged to someone else, to Jasmine, to the truth she refused to mute. And in that moment, it became clear. Jasmine hadn't come to win a debate. She had come to reclaim the narrative. The segment ended, but its ripples had only begun. By the time Jasmine stepped off the set, her phone was vibrating nonstop. Texts, missed calls, notifications, spilling over like a dam had broken. In the hallway, her chief of staff looked at her as if she had just survived a car crash and walked away smiling. "That name," the staffer whispered. "Alonzo Brewer. You didn't just throw a punch. You hit a nerve." Jasmine didn't smile. Her shoulders were tight, her eyes glazed. She wasn't thinking about the trending hashtags or the retweets piling up. She was thinking about Alonzo's sister, the late-night call they'd had a year ago, the way the woman's voice cracked while explaining that no one, not a single person in power, had even acknowledged her brother's case. That injustice had burned inside Jasmine ever since. Tonight, she'd poured it out like gasoline. By the next morning, the clip had gone viral. News anchors dissected every second. Editorials popped up across the spectrum. Some praised her restraint. Others called it a masterclass in controlled fury. But Jasmine didn't bask in it. Instead, she sat in her D.C. office, staring out the window while her inbox flooded with stories, people sharing their own Alonzo Brewers. Stories from Chicago, Baltimore, Baton Rouge, families begging for someone to see them. Then came the phone call that changed everything. A woman from San Bernardino. She wasn't calling about the debate. She was calling because, years ago, her son had died during pretrial detention in a case almost identical to Alonzo's. "I just want to say thank you," the woman said, her voice shaking, "for saying his name, for making someone listen." Jasmine clutched the edge of her desk, eyes stinging. These weren't headlines. These were wounds still open. In the days that followed, something strange began to happen. Local lawmakers introduced a new motion for bail reform. A judge in Florida reopened a file he had previously dismissed. Activists began organizing under a single banner. "Just say his name, Alonzo Brewer." Jasmine's words hadn't just hit their target. They had awakened something dormant in people, the belief that one voice could, in fact, ripple through the walls of power. Jasmine wasn't naive. She knew media cycles moved fast, but she also knew momentum when she felt it. And now, with people watching and voices rising, she faced a question heavier than before. Could she turn this moment into a movement? The momentum was real, but so was the burden. Jasmine found herself caught between viral fame and a swelling tide of expectation. Every public appearance now drew larger crowds, but with them came more stories, more pain handed to her in shaking voices and tear-streaked letters. She had become a symbol, and symbols didn't get to rest. At a church forum in St. Louis, a woman stood up, holding a photo of her teenage son. He died waiting for a hearing. They said he was a flight risk because he missed school. Jasmine couldn't speak. Her throat closed up. These weren't statistics. These were mothers, sisters, lives folded into silence, and now suddenly, expecting her to carry them forward. She wasn't just advocating policy anymore. She was holding grief. Back in her hotel room that night, Jasmine stood in front of the mirror, her reflection unfamiliar. "What if I can't fix this?" she whispered. Her chief of staff, seated nearby, looked up. "You're not supposed to fix it all. You're supposed to fight like hell, so the next Alonzo Brewer doesn't have to be remembered this way." Jasmine nodded, but the truth still gnawed at her. What if she failed them? In Congress, she introduced the Brewer Act, a sweeping bail reform bill aimed at eliminating cash bail for non-violent offenses and enforcing oversight on pretrial detentions. It was bold, it was ambitious, and it immediately met resistance. Colleagues warned her to water it down. "This won't pass in an election year," one said. "You're putting your seat at risk," another warned. Jasmine listened. Then she stepped up to the podium and began her floor speech with one sentence. "Some seats aren't worth keeping if you have to sit on your conscience to do it." Outside Capitol Hill, something unexpected happened. Protesters gathered, not in outrage, but in hope. Teachers, social workers, former detainees, people Jasmine had never met, holding signs that simply said, "Keep going." For the first time, she realized something deeply unsettling, but also liberating. The story wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to everyone, and that raised a deeper question. Now that the world had started to listen, what would she dare to say next? Washington's marble halls no longer felt like monuments to democracy. They felt like walls. Jasmine had known. Politics would be brutal, but she hadn't expected the isolation to cut this deep. After the broadcast, the same representatives who once shared panels and exchanged pleasantries now passed her with hollow nods or averted gazes. Even her allies in the Progressive Caucus grew careful, cautious, as though her truth-telling might be contagious. It wasn't that they didn't believe her. It was that they did. And belief demanded action. That terrified them more than any scandal. She sat alone during a judiciary subcommittee meeting, watching a bill slide through that she knew would disproportionately harm poor communities of color. No one asked for her input. No one looked her way. It was as if silence had become the party's armor, and her refusal to wear it made her a threat. In that silence, though, Jasmine found clarity. She wasn't just facing resistance. She was facing the system's immune response to change. And that meant she was exactly where she needed to be. What kept her steady weren't the trending hashtags or media interviews. It was the people who found her, quietly, courageously. A retired judge from Georgia emailed her a 5-page letter. "I made decisions I regret. You're doing what I never had the guts to do. Keep going." A teenage girl in Chicago sent her a drawing of a courtroom with the words, "Make them listen." A former inmate wrote simply, "You gave my story a name. That's more than I ever hoped." These weren't followers. They were co-authors in a movement that no one had invited, but everyone needed. Even in the safety of her home, Jasmine struggled to rest. At night, she replayed old cases in her mind, faces of defendants, their families, judges, all woven into the weight she now carried. Sometimes she questioned herself. Was she becoming too symbolic? Too confrontational? But then she'd remember Alonzo Brewer's name echoing in that studio, the moment the world stopped pretending not to hear. And she'd remember why she stepped into this storm in the first place. Not to win arguments, but to shift the frame entirely. The next morning, a quiet message awaited her from someone unexpected, an anonymous staffer from Pam Bondi's former office. It was short. She knew about Alonzo. We all did. Jasmine stared at the screen, the words vibrating in her chest like a siren. It wasn't vindication. It was confirmation of something much heavier. The silence had always been deliberate. The erasure, the delay, the apathy, it was never accidental. That morning, she didn't head to the Capitol. She went straight to Alonzo's mother's house. She knocked, stood face to face with a woman who had buried her son without answers and said, "They knew, and I'm not letting it go." Because now, Jasmine's mission wasn't just to speak. It was to make sure the silence had nowhere left, to hide. What would happen if every silenced voice had a name, a face, and someone in power who refused to forget them? The buzz of Washington felt like a distant hum now, something far removed from the reality Jasmine had come to understand. She had become a symbol, yes, but more than that, she had become an unstoppable force. Her truth had no expiration date, and the quiet whispers in corridors and office suites grew louder. With every day, she refused to let up. But this newfound strength came with its own cost. The more her words rippled through the air, the more Jasmine began to feel the weight of what it meant to be a true disruptor. There were days when she could hardly breathe under the pressure of it all, when the isolation wrapped tighter around her than any praise or support ever could. It wasn't just the partisan divide that stung, though. It was the personal toll. The people closest to her, her colleagues, her family, were beginning to ask, at what cost? There were nights she lay awake, her thoughts racing. Was it worth it? The targets that had once been distant were now squarely on her back. Every conversation, every meeting felt like a chess match, a calculation of how much further she could push before someone broke. But she couldn't stop. Not now. not when she saw the faces of the people who had no one else to stand up for them. A pivotal moment came when Jasmine was called into a late-night, closed-door meeting with her party's leadership. The room was tense, heavy with expectation. This time, they weren't asking her to temper her words. They were asking her to choose. Take a step back, tone it down, work with us, and you can make real change. Jasmine could feel the weight of their gaze, the quiet warning beneath their words. There were nods of agreement, silent understanding that the system didn't change through defiance, it changed through compromise. But compromise had always been a lie to Jasmine. The changes they were proposing weren't the kind that would dismantle the systems of oppression they all talked about. They were meant to perpetuate the status quo, to pretend that the system could reform itself. She couldn't buy into that anymore. Her decision was made in an instant, but the consequences of it would echo for a lifetime. The next day, during a routine floor speech, Jasmine stood taller than ever before. She spoke, not just to her colleagues, but to the country, to the unseen people she represented, the ones who had been crushed by a system designed to ignore them. Her words were not just a call to action, they were a declaration of war against silence. "I will not sit quietly," Jasmine declared. "We do not have the luxury of compromise when lives are at stake. The system does not change by appeasing the powerful, it changes by empowering the powerless." She could feel the eyes on her, the Republicans, the Democrats, even the media. But there was no going back now. The mic was hers, and she was done handing it over. The weeks that followed were a blur. Protests, backroom deals, the relentless pressure to bow down, to ease up. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Everywhere she went, from rallies in South Carolina to town halls in Detroit, people were talking. Not just about her speech, not just about her arguments. They were talking about the real issues. The families torn apart by the criminal justice system, the forgotten names, the untold stories. Her words had sparked a fire, one that refused to be extinguished. It was no longer just about her fight. It was the people's fight now. As the final days of the campaign season approached, Jasmine's name was on everyone's lips, an unstoppable force in American politics, a beacon for the voiceless. But it wasn't about the headlines. It wasn't about becoming a household name. It was about something more profound. The unrelenting truth that had reverberated from one small moment of defiance and shattered the illusion that the system could be fixed from within. Jasmine had done what many had thought impossible. She had made the powerful listen. And in doing so, she had given birth to a new wave of change. The battle wasn't over. The road ahead was long. But now Jasmine didn't have to walk it alone. What happens when one person's refusal to stay silent shakes the foundation of an entire system? And when that person becomes the voice of those who have long been forgotten, what does victory truly look like?